Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ActualTech Media Expert Series. Today's presentation is all about repatriation, what to know about when, why, and how to reclaim your cloud data. And I don't know about you, but I am really excited for this session today. This is a topic that has generated a lot of discussion over the last few years and is something I am truly looking forward to, and I hope you are too. Speaking of me, I am Keith Ward, a moderator here with ActualTech Media. And I am thrilled to be around today for this timely presentation. But before we bring on our expert, I do need to cover some housekeeping items. And the first one is that we want your questions. We encourage them in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Now, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to be doing a Q&A with our expert. So make sure to keep asking lots of them throughout the presentation today. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know if we can help you in the unlikely event, I hope it's unlikely anyway, that you have any technical issues. If you can't see a slide or hear something, just do a browser refresh as your first order of business and then try another one if that doesn't work. Sometimes it takes a couple of them. If that still doesn't work, let us know and we will hop on and try to help you out. Now, right next to that questions tab is the handouts tab, and that handouts section is full of great stuff, including a link to a free demo from Scale and a link to get more information about Quantum and their solutions. There you'll also find our event center, which has a list of upcoming events. Check those out and sign up for any that intrigue you. All right, finally now, at the end of this webinar today, we are going to be giving one of you $250 in the form of an Amazon gift card. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire event to qualify for the prize, and the official terms and conditions of the drawing can be found in the handouts section. And if you really like to read boring stuff, that is where you go. So, these expert series events are special product neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field, but it is the support of sponsors that make it possible for us to bring you this content. And we do want to give them a special shout out today. And first up is Scale Computing. Scale Computing engineered the Scale Computing platform, an IT infrastructure solution that allows organizations to do more with less. Scale Computing Hypercore software eliminates the need for traditional IT silos of virtualization software, disaster recovery software, servers, and shared storage. It replaces those silos with a fully integrated, highly available platform for running applications. How do you folks like my announcer voice there? Like I'm doing a commercial. Today's event is also sponsored by Quantum. Previously, data was simply stored and managed, but today data is an essential differentiator. Quantum says it's time to shift the focus from accumulating data to making it work much harder. It's a new data reality that's endlessly alive. Quantum enables you to enrich, orchestrate, protect, and archive your video and unstructured data securely and at scale now and for decades to come. So once again, take advantage of that handout section where you can find links to the companies I've just talked about. And with that, why don't we move on to the main event so you can hear or stop hearing me talk. I think that is a good plan right about now. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Howard Cohen. Howard is a compelling content creator, not just a content creator, but a compelling content creator. He has been a senior executive in some of the most highly reputed channel partner organizations in the industry for more than 25 years. During that time, he's managed every facet of a channel partner business, including sales, marketing, professional services, operations, and channel partner management. He is truly an engaging and informative speaker. We are absolutely honored to have him presenting for us today. Howard is ready to go. So Howard, I am turning the mic over to you. You ready?
Very much, Keith. It's a shame about Keith. He lacks enthusiasm. What can you do?
I hear that all the time. All the time.
Maybe I'll do my Mr. Movie Phone voice. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Howard M. Cohen, as Keith pointed out. For 35, 40 years, I was an executive in the industry. Then about 15 years ago, I started writing for and about the channel and the industry. And Most recently, I've introduced my own personal newsletter if you want to keep up with what I'm up to. At the bottom, techchannel.substack.com. I hope to prompt a great dialogue with all of you and anybody else who subscribes, and like that there. So now let's talk about repatriation. What to know about when, why, and how to reclaim your cloud data. And of course, I'm going to take just a little bit of issue with one word in the title, and that's the word reclaim. It suggests that you gave up your data. And I think that can be very, very misleading. You're not giving up your data, you're putting it somewhere. And now you've decided to put it somewhere else. Understand that in my part of the industry, what I spent most of my life doing was trying to simplify concepts for people. So you're going to find I'm going to work a little bit at simplifying the concept of repatriation, making it highly accessible, and making it something that you can develop a strategy around very quickly without too much mind bending. Okay. Those of you who have attended any of my sessions before know that I like to start every session with a word of the day. And today's no different. Today's word is one of those big highfalutin words, or. Yeah, I know, not very impressive. But I felt it was important to emphasize the or, and I'll tell you why. Think about for a moment why it is I put the word or right dead center in the middle of the screen. I could just as easily have put it in the upper left-hand corner. I could just as easily have put it in the lower right-hand corner or the lower left-hand corner. I could have even put it in the upper right-hand corner and the middle. Could have put it in both. What's my point? Replace the word or with the concept of data. Now, I have to point out we have a slide fail here. That data, that bacon there is usually sizzling, and it is always there in honor of one of our other hosts here at ATM. It's Scott Becker, who has loved this slide for a long time. I use it to say that data is the new bacon. Everybody loves bacon, and quite frankly, everybody loves their data. The only thing better than bacon, more bacon. The only thing better than data is more data. Well, right now, and since the beginning of computing as we know it, we kept our data in a box somewhere on our premises or in our data center or our network closet or wherever it was we had our equipment. That's where the data was. Then at a given point, probably about 14 years ago, we were introduced to cloud computing. And to the cloud. Wow, the cloud. A lot of people made a whole big deal about the cloud. And, you'll get my point in a second. After a certain amount of coaxing and convincing that it was safe and secure, a lot of people went ahead and moved their data from the box in their own data center to the cloud. Hey, my data's in the cloud. Where's that? I don't know. It's your data. Don't you want to know where it is? And so they kept it there. What most people don't know is that in the early going of the cloud, as many as 3/4 of the companies that put their data there, at one point or another, brought their data back. Now, of course, they couldn't say they moved it back. They had to call it a migration. They migrated their data to the cloud. They migrated their data back from the cloud. And I submit to you that when you're dealing with just about anybody, it's a lot easier to say we moved the data. And keep the concept simple. Keep everything simple. The process itself is not. It's not always that simple. But let's keep our concept simple. And so we migrated our data to the cloud, and then some of us migrated it back. And by the way, that is going on to this day. That is to say, there are people moving data into the cloud, and there are people moving data back out of the cloud. And some people like to say when they move the data back out of the cloud, they are repatriating the data. They're bringing it back home. And I worry that that gives people the misconception that there is an issue of data sovereignty involved, that the data was in a foreign country where it's no longer welcome. That is not an element that needs to be present for what most people call repatriation. Repatriation is simply bringing it home to your own on-premises infrastructure. Okay. So the question, as it has always been, has been to cloud or not to cloud. Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio. I'll spare you the soliloquy. But the point is that one of the questions we now always are asking ourselves is, should we put this workload in the cloud? Which cloud should we put it in? I mean, remember, we now live in the era of multi-cloud. So not only do we have to say, well, I think we're going to put this one in the cloud for these reasons, but we also have to say, well, I think we're going to put it in this particular cloud because it has this particular services or these particular capacities or what have you, whatever your reasons are. It's a decision chain that you have to go through. To help you go through it, one of the things I wanted to do was enter a pop quiz here. Here's our pop quiz. What's that? And of course, that's a blade server. If I were to ask you where it is, you really have no way of knowing, but it could just as easily be in your data center or your network closet. It could be in a co-location facility. It could be in any one of a number of places. Okay, now, what's that? Yeah, it's the same blade server. However, this one is in the cloud. And I submit to you that other than capacity, size, processor, whatever, that's the only difference, is where that server is currently physically installed. They're usually much bigger, faster, better, higher order servers, but that's almost immaterial. The point is the data could be in your server, or, there's that or, it could be in the cloud server. And from the perspective of the data, it's not much difference. And so I'm really trying to simplify the concept of cloud here to say that there is no mysticism to the cloud. And you probably all know this, and I apologize, but I think it's important to say it. I think it's important for those of you who are in the IT department to say it to your users. There's no magic here. It's a server. We just chose to use somebody else's server rather than our own because they take care of it. We just pay them for the use of it. Okay. It could, of course, also be, and you may decide that there's some workloads you want to keep in your data center. And there are other workloads that you're fine with having in one of the many cloud services. Okay. Hopefully I haven't beaten that to death. So now that we understand cloud better, and we understand the relationship between the data, the servers, the cloud, the infrastructure, and you, let's define our terms. What exactly is cloud repatriation? And it is frighteningly simpler than I think you may think it is. It's simply the process of moving data, moving applications, moving workloads from the cloud back to on-premises infrastructure or to a different cloud provider or a colo center or what have you. That's it. It's moving the data back. And it has nothing to do with geographically or politically where the data is. I think repatriation kind of says that, but that's not the case. So that's cloud repatriation. It's not new. As a matter of fact, as I said, 14 years ago when the cloud was brand spanking new, people were already repatriating their data sometimes. In some cases, because they weren't confident about the original migration. In some cases, because they found it didn't work as well. There were plenty. I mean, in the beginning, there were plenty of problems. We overcome all of them, and we'll find new ones. But according to many studies, between 70 and 80% of companies have at one point or another repatriated some of their workloads back to the cloud since the cloud became mainstream. And as a matter of fact, the whole term cloud repatriation is often attributed to a blog that appeared on the Andreessen Horowitz website in 2021. So, I mean, this is not a new concept. This is not, startling. It should be something that's always on your mind. And I'm going to explain why as we go. When should you decide to do some cloud repatriation? The answer to this one's pretty simple. If it ain't working, you do fix it. In other words, if you determine that a specific workload is not operating as efficiently, it's not costing less, or it's otherwise preferable for some reason to move the data from where it is in the cloud to elsewhere. Maybe you just read an article about one of the cloud providers and you no longer trust them. I mean, people do that. So there's all kinds of reasons why this may happen. But the point is that you can only determine that a specific workload isn't getting everything it deserves if you're watching it, if you're measuring it, and you should be doing that at all times. So that's when cloud repatriation. Next up, and you're going to get angry with me for this one, how cloud repatriation. Before the show, Keith mentioned to me that we could use the standard consultant's answer, it depends, and he's exactly right. In this case, how you repatriate your data does depend upon the nature and the characteristics of the data itself. Some workloads have extensive metadata, and you have to make sure that the metadata is preserved in relation to the main data. And that requires some pretty specific, pretty sophisticated processes to get the data from one place to the other. You have to determine if your infrastructure can handle the volume of data you want to move at the velocity you want to move it at, and in the variety of different kinds of data types you want to move. So there's all kinds of questions that have to be asked first, and each one gets a different kind of answer. So it really does depend upon the nature of the workload as to how you're going to strategically migrate your data, repatriate your data back to where you want it to be. My admonition, if you're going to do any kind of migration at all, plan first. There's that magic 4-letter word, plan. Build a business case around it. Make sure you understand all the implications of it. And when you're ready to do it, choose really good tools to do it with. Don't skimp on those tools, because the penny you save is going to be way pound foolish. It can cost you a ton of money if you have a bad migration. The other thing I would suggest, since this is probably going to be something you almost never do, engage somebody else to do it. Give yourself somebody else to blame. No, seriously. Engage somebody who's an expert at these things. Because there are people who do it all the time for all kinds of companies. And there's a reason they remain successful, even though the cloud's been around for 14 years. It's because it's something that's very seldom done. You can't justify the expense of training your people to do it because they're only going to do it once. Consider engaging an expert who does this all the time. And now we finally get to the word that Kipling would have had me start with in the how, what, when, where, why model, which is attributed to Rudyard Kipling. The great Simon Sinek tells us that we ought to start with why. And by the way, if you haven't read the book, great book. Very well thought out, a great framework for thinking about how to think. But he's right. We should start with why. And just to get it off my chest, part of the why is actually kind of silly. We like using fancy phrases. We just do. Migration, perfect example. When you move data, you're migrating it. Most terms that deal with computing have something to do with velocity, speed, or motion. We don't know why, but it's always been that way. Actually, if you go all the way back to the 1970s, okay, now you can imagine just how senior a resultant I am. In the 1970s, there was an operating system called CPM, the Control Program and Monitor. And this actually preceded DOS and Windows and everything else. And it was created by a gentleman by the name of Gary Kildall. And he decided to come up with a name for the utility you use to copy data from one place to another. Same thing we're doing now. He called it PIP. You didn't copy data. You didn't move data. You PIP'd it. PIP stood for Peripheral Interchange Program. So when I say we like using fancy phrases, I mean we have always liked using fancy phrases. So become accustomed to that and dismiss it. We're moving data. One of the things I spotted several times as I was surveying the current state of the press on repatriation is that it's one of the hottest trends in the industry today, and no, it's not. It's not one of the hottest trends. Miniskirts were a hot trend. Rock and roll music was a hot trend. Moving data from place to place has happened since there was data. And ignore the hyperbole, get past the fluff, and get down to the reality is that cloud repatriation, moving data to the cloud or perhaps back from the cloud or somewhere else, is something you're always going to be doing. It's something you've always done. So don't let the madness get you. Okay. Another one. It's about agility. What isn't about agility? There is nothing about moving data that really increases your strategic agility. The fact that you have the agility enables you to move the data. Yes, we're practicing some agility when we move data from place to place to place to place. And it is a tribute to our agility. But cloud repatriation isn't about agility. It's about putting the data in the right place to do the right things in the right way as efficiently and productively as we possibly can. And again, it doesn't have to be or, it could be and. This goes back to the dawn of cloud. At the dawn of cloud, everybody was like, oh, I'm not moving to the cloud. And when you asked them, you finally realized that they thought they had to take everything they had in storage and move it wholesale to the cloud. All or nothing at all. And it took a while to dispel that ridiculous notion. You pick and choose the workloads you want to move. You start with the ones that have the least hazard, the least risk. Get used to migrating data. Then the bigger ones, and then the more complex ones. You have a plan. It doesn't have to be all or nothing at all. You can pick and choose. And even now, if you repatriate some data, you're doing it for a specific reason. That reason probably doesn't apply to all of your other workloads. Another reason why cloud repatriation, this time a real one, cost. No surprise here. Cost is probably the first thing people think of as the reason for just about anything they do. And well, it should be. When we first moved to the cloud, we did so in part because we felt, well, it's going to be less expensive. We're sharing resources with a pool of resources with other users, and it's secure, so we don't have to worry, and we don't have to pay for the whole thing, and it's going to be less expensive. Over time, we discovered cloud doesn't always scale so well. Depending on the type of data you're moving, depending on the type of data you have, the variety, volume, and velocity you want to move at, the three big V's, it may be more expensive over time than keeping it on premise. Fortunately, you've got some levers here. If there are cloud workloads that are becoming more expensive, you can choose to repatriate them. Move them back to on-prem. Stop spending so much money on them. Just that simple. It's not a big political harangue. It's okay, it costs less to do it here than to do it there, so let's do it here. Doctor, it hurts when I go like this. Don't go like that. Governance, compliance, data sovereignty are all issues that we need to be concerned with. Cloud governance is by nature going to be somewhat more complex than traditional governance, if only because there's more infrastructure involved, there are more jumps involved, there are more organizations involved. And so you have to be sensitive to all of those. If you are subject to regulations and must maintain compliance, the fact that you use a cloud service that is compliant with that regulation doesn't make you compliant. I wish it did. I wish it was as simple as signing up for a compliance service and boom, you're compliant. It's just not the way it works. The agencies that require you to comply with regulations want you to be compliant. That's a combination not only of your computer infrastructure, but of your internal processes, human policies, all kinds of things. So don't just think, oh, I signed up for that, they're compliant, now I'm compliant. That's a mistake. And as far as data sovereignty goes, data sovereignty is a moving target. I remember, had to be 15 years ago, maybe more, when I first became an Office 365 user, and I discovered that my email was on a server in Kazakhstan. I was wowed. I was excited. Look how far away my data is. I was worried as to whether or not Kazakhstan liked us or not. But given that Microsoft was managing it, I didn't worry too much. Today, you have to worry too much. You have to worry too much because things change so quickly. What was safe yesterday may not be safe today. We've seen wars suddenly spring up in places. And if your data happens to be in one of those countries, So do pay attention to where your data is. And oh, by the way, a backup copy of your data is still your data. That's your data. It's data. It doesn't have any difference to it at all. Consider it to be live data. And so if it's in a place that it really shouldn't be, you may find somebody appropriating it who you don't want to have it. So I recommend we be very, very careful when it comes to data sovereignty, and do pay attention to it. Some people are not satisfied with performance in the cloud. There are now services that will give you your entire desktop in one package, resident on a cloud provider's server somewhere. And many of them suggest that they'll put it on the cloud provider's server nearest you. I mean geographically, physically nearest you, because it will reduce latency. So latency has become that hypercritical. They're doing everything they can to minimize latency, and minimize latency. Because we all feel the need for speed. Thank you, Flash. Another issue that causes people to decide to repatriate their data is to get away from vendor lock-in. Vendor lock-in has been around since there were service bureaus. I'm talking about like the 1960s, even before. Once a vendor is selling you their services, they want to continue selling you their services. They want to make it hard for you to go anywhere else. And so they make you use their utilities. They make you use their services related to their other services. Vendor lock-in can be insidious. You can find out you're locked in at a very bad moment, like when you're moving your data out and find out that you really can't. It's something you need to plan for, something you need to look into deeply. Make sure you know all of the exigencies. Get yourself ready and move somewhere else. Personally, and this is just personal opinion, if you see that a vendor is going out of their way to lock you in, you probably want to start considering another vendor. It's just rude. It's not a pleasant thing to do to you. And if they're a quality service, they shouldn't feel the need. They should feel that you'll stay because their service is just that good. So vendor lock-in is an issue. Changes in your business. You merge with another company. You acquire another company, or they acquire you. Your executive team launches a new policy. Your board launches a new executive team. Any one of a number of things can change. And it can cause you to need to change how you deal with certain data assets. Some companies are just sensitive to wanting the data to be within their own four walls. I'm sure you've all heard that. If you're connected to the internet, that is an illusion. You don't have four walls anymore. Or if you do, you have a big gaping hole in one of them. But again, corporate policy, you may have no say. And that's another reason you may have to pull data back from the cloud to your own infrastructure. System management. And here, I love this graphic because it kind of visibly shows you what you sometimes don't see. Yes, when you're working on premise, your cost of software licensing is a much smaller proportion than it is when you're in the cloud. In the cloud, it's 2/3 of your costs. No surprise. But when you're on premise, you're responsible for literally everything else. You're in the hardware business. You're running hardware. You're managing IT experts. You're performing maintenance on all the equipment. You're training all the users, supporting all. There's a million things that you are doing. Whereas when you're in the cloud, there are only a few things you are doing. The rest of it is handled by the cloud service. So from a perspective of system management, if you're a huge company and have an enormous IT department, well, you may want to keep a lot of things on premise because you feel more comfortable controlling it yourself. That may be an illusion. But if you're a moderate-sized company or a smaller company, having somebody else manage everything is a great burden lifted. And so you have to consider it. I will show you the exact same graphic when it comes to data and network security. Now, this one's slightly different. Yeah, in the cloud, they're doing more of it. But the fiduciary responsibility for the data itself always remains with you. Always. You can't, you can try to sue them, but read your contract. You're not going to get the amount of relief you really want to get. Nobody's going to leave themselves that exposed. And if you want to boil it down to something that you can really identify with, if there is a data compromise and your data is stolen or corrupted or what have you, and you lose business time and therefore lose a lot of money, who's going to lose their job? You or the cloud service? The cloud service may lose a client, you as a client, They have other clients. You have a job, one job. You're going to have to go find another. And so it hits close to home that you own ongoing responsibility, fiduciary responsibility for the health of your data. Some people repatriate data when they find out that their legacy systems just don't run in the cloud. The fact is, you don't see a lot of legacy systems running in the cloud. They are typically a denizen of an on-premise infrastructure. If you're going to move them to the cloud, you're going to have to refactor them first. And that's a bigger project. It's going to take more time. So don't think you can willy-nilly just move a legacy system into the cloud. If you're successful, that's what's called getting really lucky. You may repatriate data as part of a hybrid strategy. You may feel that you're too dependent on public cloud or private cloud, and therefore you want to balance it out with some on-premise presence for certain data assets that you'd prefer to keep at home. Again, this is strategic. It's completely dependent upon your personal preferences and what you decide to be right and wrong. But many people do bring data back because they want to balance, not so much do load balancing, but do just balance where their data is invested. You may repatriate data due to storage issues. You may find that you're paying an awful lot to store data in the cloud that doesn't need to be there. You don't use it much. You use it every once in a blue moon. And of course, we all like to level our data. If you have data that's so seldom used, get yourself some cheap commodity storage. Make sure that you have a replicate, so you have at least 2 copies in the possible case that one may fail. And move your low velocity data to low cost storage in your basement. I mean, it's just that simple. Dead storage is a good reason. You don't want to pay a service to store your dead storage. You might as well do that, at home. So storage is often a reason why people just pull some data back, put it in a cheap repository, and off we go. And finally, another reason why cloud repatriation is reducing dependency. On your left, you see your LAN behind the firewall and then connected through the firewall out to the wild woolly world where your wide area users are, the cloud is, everything else is. And over time, you become more and more dependent upon all those external resources. Some companies, especially smaller ones, get uncomfortable with that, and you can't blame them. So they move a lot of things back. Good reason to do so. So you decide just how comfortable you feel having the resources you depend upon being anywhere but on your own, in your own facility, and you determine what you need to move back and what you don't. And that decision varies by people. I mean, it's really very, very dependent upon your personal preferences. Okay, so just recapping the cloud repatriation challenges, cost of repatriation. How much is it going to cost to get the data back? Is it worth it? How much is it going to cost to keep it where it is? Is it worth it? Do you have the infrastructure to move it back in a timely fashion without business disruption? Do you have the expertise on board, or do you need to engage a contractor to help you do it? Is security in place to protect the data in transit back from the cloud to your facilities? Be aware you're probably going to pay data transfer and egress fees. They're going to happen. And also familiarize yourself with the complexity of the specific migration you're planning to perform. Because it's probably worse than you think. And it's safer to think that it's worse than you think, because then you'll be better prepared. Just a few more cloud repatriation takeaways. It doesn't have to be all or nothing at all. You can always move some workloads one way or the other. You can actively decide which workloads go where and why. There's no defaults necessarily. I absolutely recommend you always build a case, your business case, for moving each workload. You're especially going to want to have that if anybody ever questions why you did it. And remember that nothing is irreversible. If you've moved it back to your data center and you realize, yeah, it was better in the cloud, it's embarrassing. But go with what's best for the enterprise. Move it back to the cloud if you need to move it back to the cloud. So I said this was a simple concept. We spent 40 some odd minutes on it. Do we have any questions?
I think it is likely that we do have some questions, Howard. First of all, I want to thank you for that great presentation. Even though I'm fairly familiar with a lot of stuff around repatriation, this showed me a number of things that I really hadn't considered. The hows and the whys and all of that was just a beautiful way to break it down. So thank you for informing and illuminating me. That was just a superb presentation. So, and the other thing about that presentation is now I have a craving for a BLT for lunch. So I'm going to have to go and get one of those right away.
Yeah, I get a lot of that.
All right, so let's dive into these questions. So Kurt wants to know about examples of good tools for repatriation, but I want to kind of rephrase that a little bit. Rather than pointing to specific vendors or anything, I'm thinking it might be more useful to provide some general guidelines for what a good tool for repatriation should do.
And to answer that, I'm going to go back to an ancient concept, which is the carpenter's rule. The best migration software always measures twice before it cuts once. That is to say, you're going to do your migration, whichever way you're going, in stages. First, you're going to evaluate and assess, and then you're going to make sure you know everything one of the great adages about just computing in general is know thy data. You're going to get to know your data. You're going to get to know the structure of your data, the tables that are involved, the metadata that's involved. You're going to know it really, really well and answer a lot of questions. Then your data is going to be packaged for transfer, and it's going to leave a copy of the package behind. So if you have to dial back, you can. And then, only then, it's going to transfer it forward. It's going to then check it when it gets there. It's going to measure it again when it gets there, and then give you an opportunity to evaluate it and approve it before it does anything else. And again, your backup copies will still remain for some time to come. There's nothing mystical or magical about that process, but there are definitely some migration tools that do it better than others. I always tell people, if you want the best opinion on which tools to use, consult your peers. Fortunately, we live in an environment, in a community where a lot of our peers are willing to invest their time to review stuff. And some of those reviews are fabulous, brilliant. Take advantage of them. I've had my bacon saved by them in many cases.
The wisdom of the community can be very powerful. Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Fellow bacon lover Seth has a question that I also want to rephrase a little bit. He says, can companies save money moving back to on-premises? But I might ask it in this kind of a way. Is there data that you have seen, Howard, and I'm not sure if it's out there, that companies are saving money that they expect, or maybe does the data show the other thing, that they don't ultimately end up saving as much money as they think by repatriating the data? I don't know what the state of the industry is for that kind of statistics.
I think the larger problem, Keith, is that a lot of people do a repatriation and then never really measure the impact of it. And this is rampant. I mean, a lot of people don't put a lot of time and effort or the appropriate amount of time and effort into measuring ROI. It's not easy to do. It's never easy to do, but it is literally always worth trying. In the case of repatriation, I instinctively think that highly transactional data ought to be kept on-prem. I can't imagine that you're getting a more efficient utilization across a long line than you are keeping it local. And others will argue, well, that's true, but then at the end of day reconciliation, don't you want to take the data and move it off-prem? My reaction to that is I'd rather copy it off-prem. I'd rather make a copy of it off-prem as a backup more than anything else. But it's something I've practiced for, I guess, decades, that transactional data makes more sense. And I think a lot of IT experts would agree.
I think that's pretty eye-opening, actually, Howard, because I'm not sure that the general conventional wisdom does see it that way, but to me, that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. So here's a really interesting one. In your experience, does repatriation usually involve a lot of downtime? And if so, what are some recommendations to avoid that downtime? Do you have to take systems offline, to do this repatriation, for example?
Done correctly, there should be no disruption of work. And I've seen plenty of repatriations where people didn't even know it got done. And I applaud those teams because they did it right. You're dealing with data, and there's going to be a cutover point where you're not using the old data source anymore. You're using the new data source. That needs to be planned. It needs to be rehearsed. It needs to be executed. There could, depending upon the scope of the environment we're talking about, it could mean that you need to stop everything for a short period of time and then start again on the new infrastructure, wherever that may be. But it is absolutely viable to be mapping to storage facilities on both sides of the equation and gradually move one by one until finally everything is moved over. You can repatriate without disruption. On the other hand, I would say make life easy. If you're not a 21 shift operation and you do have a down period, use it.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. All right, Howard, we are winding down. I got one final question for you here. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you think that companies make when it comes to repatriation? Now, this could be in terms of doing it in the first place, not doing it properly, but what do you see as if you could tell companies, hey, here's what happens that you should not do that does tend to happen over and over again? Are there one or two examples of things that you see?
God, I'm so tempted to answer, don't be stupid. No, because I think that the one biggest mistake we make in anything we do is to think that we're exempt, that the rules don't apply to us. We can, for example, decide that we're not getting our bang for our buck in the cloud, so we just copy a file from the cloud back to a server in the data center. Now, there is absolutely a possibility, remote, but there is a possibility you might get away with it in certain circumstances. Every now and again, that happens. But the reality is, more often than not, you're inviting disaster. That's the biggest mistake you can make. You've got to believe that there are related data files that all have to be moved, if not simultaneously, at least together, for you to successfully migrate from one place to another. So that feeling of exemption, which I like to refer to as stupidity, and I'm well within my right to do so because I've practiced it in the past plenty. and I've burned for it. But look, in the course of a day, we're all crazy, we're all busy, we're wearing a million hats, we're putting out fires. We may just say, let's just move it. And there will come a day when you'll say, boy, I wish I'd never thought that. And that to me is the biggest mistake I've seen made.
I think that label stupid applies to a bunch of us, including the person who is speaking right now. So once again, Howard, it was such a delight to have you on. I enjoyed it so much and learned just a ton. And that's why I love doing these too, and being a moderator for these types of events. Thank you for being on with us, and I can't wait to have you back on again.
Same here. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and for your attention.
Thanks, Howard. Okay, everyone. Great session today. And as we wind down, we do have one more thing that we have got to take care of, and that is making one of you $250 richer. As I mentioned up top, you do have to stick around for the entire event to be eligible to win our Amazon gift card. And we do have a winner for today. And that winner is Steve Zering from Pennsylvania. Congratulations to you, Steve. We will be in touch ASAP to get you your card. And folks, with that, we are wrapped. On behalf of the ActualTech Media team, I want to thank Scale Computing and Quantum for making this event possible. I want to thank Howard for being here with us. It's my first time moderating an event that Howard was the speaker for, and it was just so much fun for me to be here today. Can't wait, as I said, to do it again and to have him back. And I think all of you agree with me. Thanks to you attendees for being here, for your great questions, for your interest in this topic. Thanks for spending part of your day with us. It's really an honor for us to be here with you. And hopefully I'll see you in the next event. And let's see, that is a wrap for us right now, folks. You can get back to the rest of your day. Go cook up some bacon, get some coffee, and have a nice snack. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.